It began with a whisper, one that no royal aide wanted to acknowledge, no journalist dared to print, and no member of the British public could have imagined. A whisper that questioned not just a mother's choice, but the very foundation of royal truth itself. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was the kind of rumor that starts in the corners of aristocratic circles, slips into quiet dinner conversations, and then, without warning, explodes into global headlines. The name at the center of it? Meghan Markle. And the woman who set the spark? Lady Colin Campbell, the aristocrat turned royal chronicler whose claims have once again shaken the walls of Buckingham Palace. When Lady C spoke, the world listened, even those who despised her audacity. Her new revelation was not just another royal critique. It was an accusation that cut through the heart of the monarchy's most fragile narrative, motherhood. According to her explosive leak, documents allegedly exist confirming that Archie Harrison, Mountbatten Windsor, the son presented to the world as the first biracial royal baby, may have been adopted. And if that wasn't shocking enough, the same leak suggested that Meghan Markle had refused royal medical guidance, specifically rejecting the traditional immunization schedule for her child. The claim seemed impossible, yet eerily believable. It wasn't just about adoption or vaccines. It was about deception, secrecy, and power, the kind of story that forces even the most loyal royalists to pause. For years, the palace has built its reputation on continuity, discretion, and immaculate presentation. Every baby's birth, from Queen Elizabeth to Prince George, followed protocol. Official announcements, medical supervision, and public records. But Meghan and Harry's experience broke the pattern. No public appearance outside a hospital. No medical staff signatures released. Even the birth certificate took weeks to appear, and when it did, it was quietly altered. For royal watchers, it was the first sign that something didn't add up. That unease never fully disappeared. The palace's insistence on privacy clashed with a public hungry for transparency. But the world moved on until now. Lady C's leak brought everything rushing back. Overnight, archived news clips resurfaced, analysts revisited discrepancies, and experts started asking uncomfortable questions. If her claim holds weight, it could redefine not just Meghan's story, but the legitimacy of Archie's royal status, his line of succession, and even the public's trust in the monarchy's integrity. The timing of Lady C's statement was not accidental. It came just days after renewed speculation about Harry and Meghan's strained relationship with the royal family, following their latest public appearance. Her words landed like a thunderclap. The truth about Archie is not what we were told. It was vague, provocative, and deliberate. The internet erupted. Within hours, royal forums, YouTube channels, and tabloids turned the phrase into fire. Viewers demanded answers. What did she mean by "not what we were told"? Was this just another rumor for attention, or a revelation suppressed for years? The power of this story lies in the unanswered questions. From the moment Meghan's pregnancy was announced, skeptics noticed an unusual level of secrecy. Palace insiders described a media blackout around the birth plan. Senior staff were excluded from briefings. Even doctors who traditionally attended royal births were not confirmed publicly. And when the couple appeared with their newborn at Windsor Castle, the world saw a carefully staged image. No hospital backdrop, no crying baby swaddled in a medical blanket, no details about time or method of delivery. It was unprecedented. The Duchess smiled, but the tension behind the moment was palpable. The middle of the introduction builds on that tension, the subtle sense that something monumental is being hidden in plain sight. Because this isn't just about one child's story. It's about a pattern, a series of decisions that together painted a portrait of calculated distance. Meghan and Harry insisted on privacy, yet monetized their image through interviews and documentaries. They rejected royal control, yet kept royal titles. And now, according to Lady C, they presented a child who may not have been biologically theirs, while simultaneously rejecting standard royal medical practices. It's a narrative that forces the public to confront a disturbing possibility, that everything about the modern royal fairy tale may have been staged. The heart of the introduction lies in connecting Lady C's revelation with the larger royal pattern of control and concealment. Because if there's one thing history has shown, it's that the palace rarely reveals the full truth in real time. From King Edward's abdication to Diana's private despair, the institution has always chosen silence over scandal. So, when Lady C claims that the adoption records exist, and that medical exemptions were issued at Meghan's request, it aligns disturbingly with how royal controversies have always been managed, through omission. The question isn't just whether Meghan adopted Archie, but whether the palace allowed the public to believe otherwise for the sake of image preservation. Imagine the implications. If adoption papers were indeed sealed under royal privilege, that would explain why no hospital staff ever confirmed Meghan's delivery. It would explain the odd delay in revealing the birth certificate. It would explain the whispers that certain medical details did not match protocol. Even the christening photos, notably private without godparent names, could be seen in a new light. Everything that once looked like a demand for privacy might instead look like a coordinated effort to hide a truth too explosive to reveal. And then comes the second revelation: Meghan's alleged refusal to immunize Archie under the standard royal health program. To the casual observer, it might seem like a personal choice. But within the monarchy, medical tradition is more than policy, it's heritage. From the Queen down, royal children follow precise medical protocols, supervised by the royal household physicians. Rejecting them isn't just unconventional, it's defiance. Lady C's claim adds another dimension: that Meghan refused the palace's medical oversight entirely, choosing instead a California-style holistic approach. In royal terms, that's a declaration of independence. The palace's silence only deepens the mystery. Since the leak, no official denial has been issued. No statement correcting the record. No medical records released. Instead, the institution has fallen into its familiar rhythm of non-engagement, a tactic as old as the monarchy itself. But silence, in the digital age, doesn't bury a story. It feeds it. Viewers don't just want gossip, they want explanations. They want to understand how such secrecy could exist in an era of transparency, and why the royal family seems paralyzed when faced with accountability. As the introduction builds toward its emotional peak, the narrative pivots to the human cost. Beyond politics and protocol lies something far more intimate: identity. If Archie's parentage has been misrepresented, what does that mean for the child himself? For Harry, who has publicly described fatherhood as his greatest joy. For Meghan, whose image as a modern, devoted mother has been her moral shield against criticism. And for the monarchy, whose public trust rests on its authenticity. Lady C's claims don't just expose a scandal. They unravel the delicate tapestry of identity and trust that the House of Windsor has spent decades repairing. The middle section transitions to the global impact of the leak. Within hours, social media platforms were flooded with hashtags. #ArchieTruth, #LadyCLeak, #RoyalAdoption. Journalists scrambled to trace the origin of the documents. Bloggers compared timelines, cross-referencing inconsistencies in Meghan's pregnancy appearances. Even international outlets, usually cautious about British royal gossip, began running features. What started as a fringe claim quickly became a global conversation about royal credibility and transparency. And in that chaos, Lady C's voice grew louder. Unapologetic, defiant, and self-assured. She promised that more evidence would surface. The palace, as always, said nothing. But silence is never neutral. It creates a vacuum, and vacuums demand to be filled. Analysts began piecing together the puzzle, revisiting moments once brushed aside. Meghan's interview where she avoided direct questions about the birth. The photographer who later claimed he wasn't allowed near the hospital. The curious absence of royal midwives from the official birth record. Each fragment that once seemed meaningless now fit into a narrative that pointed toward concealment. Whether true or not, perception became reality, and perception for the monarchy is everything. As the introduction nears its conclusion, it slows, shifting from revelation to reflection. The question isn't simply what Lady C has said, but why now? Why would a royal insider choose this moment to reignite the debate? Some speculate it's retaliation, that Lady C feels slighted by Meghan's earlier dismissive remarks about her. Others believe she's driven by loyalty to tradition, determined to expose what she sees as the greatest royal deception of the modern age. Regardless of motive, her statement forces the public and the palace to confront uncomfortable truths about power, image, and authenticity. And that's where the introduction finds its emotional center. Because at its core, this isn't just about Meghan Markle. It's about the institution that enabled secrecy to thrive. The British monarchy has survived wars, divorces, and scandals, but each time it relies on one strategy: control the narrative. When Diana spoke her truth, the palace called her unstable. When Meghan demanded privacy, they called her difficult. Now, with adoption and immunization claims surfacing, the institution faces a deeper challenge, not just of image but of legitimacy. If even one thread of Lady C's claim proves accurate, the palace's credibility could collapse under its own silence. The final moments of the introduction serve as a cinematic pause, a space for the viewer to sit with unease. The camera metaphorically lingers on three key images: the sealed adoption records Lady C describes, the birth certificate with its strange edits, and the blank-faced silence of Buckingham Palace. The narrator's voice lowers. If this is true, then history will remember this not as a scandal, but as the moment the royal illusion cracked. Because every monarchy, no matter how grand, is built on perception. And once perception fractures, truth becomes unstoppable. This is where the investigation begins. This is where Lady C's words meet evidence, reaction, and the relentless pursuit of truth. This is where we separate myth from reality and question everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, Archie Harrison, and the royal family itself. It started, as so many royal crises do, with a single interview that no one expected to matter. Lady Colin Campbell, elegant in her usual poised defiance, appeared on a late evening broadcast with a knowing half-smile and an ominous pause before she spoke. The host, clearly uncertain whether to treat her as a guest or a grenade, asked her one question that would set the entire media world on fire. "Lady C, do you believe Meghan Markle has been truthful about the birth of her son, Archie?" There was a moment of silence, a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity, and then she answered with a line that would echo across newsrooms and social feeds for days. The records tell a very different story. Those 8 words detonated like a bomb. By dawn, headlines around the world had rearranged themselves to accommodate the scandal. The internet was ablaze. Lady C leaks Archie adoption files. One outlet declared, "Palace rocked by shocking maternal revelation." Another screamed. Even the more cautious broadsheets, usually reserved in tone, found themselves unable to resist the momentum of the moment. Within hours, journalists were digging into archives, royal correspondents were summoned to emergency roundtables, and Buckingham Palace's press team was allegedly locked in late-night crisis calls. For decades, Lady C has cultivated her reputation as both a critic and a custodian of royal truth. Her books and interviews have often danced between gossip and revelation, but this time felt different. Her demeanor carried the calm assurance of someone holding more than speculation. When pressed for clarification, she merely said, "Let's just say, the truth always finds its way to light, even if the corridors of the palace try to bury it." That sentence alone suggested she wasn't bluffing. People familiar with royal media tactics understood the pattern: hints first, documents later. In the early hours following her remarks, social media platforms transformed into digital courtrooms. Some demanded evidence. Others insisted that Lady C was finally exposing what insiders had long whispered about. Old video clips resurfaced showing inconsistencies in Meghan's pregnancy timeline. Body shapes fluctuating between appearances, the mysterious folding dress video, the unusually tight schedule between supposed labor and public presentation. Each detail, once dismissed as conspiracy, now became circumstantial proof in a growing public trial. Inside Buckingham Palace, tension reportedly spiked. Communications aides were instructed to monitor, not respond. The strategy was simple: silence neutralizes chaos. But in an age where silence sounds like guilt, that tactic backfired instantly. News channels replayed Lady C's interview on loop, dissecting every word, every gesture. Even her pauses were analyzed for hidden meaning. Palace officials watched as social sentiment shifted from curiosity to conviction. The world wasn't just asking whether Lady C's claim was true. They were starting to believe it was. By day 2, mainstream journalists began reporting the supposed existence of sealed adoption files. A few outlets claimed that documents were held under royal confidentiality laws, possibly exempt from public release due to national security provisions. That phrase, national security, added an entirely new layer of intrigue. What could possibly make a child's birth file a matter of security? Analysts speculated that certain birth details, if revealed, might expose institutional manipulation or even falsified medical certification. Others suggested the monarchy might have invoked privacy protections to avoid public uproar. Either way, the appearance of secrecy had become more damaging than any revelation could have been. Meanwhile, Lady C doubled down. She gave another interview, this time filmed outside her Sussex estate, where she appeared with folders in her hand, not revealing their contents but hinting they contained correspondence of legal and parental nature. Her tone was unbothered, almost surgical. "I am not here to defame," she said. "I am here to preserve truth, and truth, once denied, festers." The choice of words was deliberate. Legal and parental hinted at adoption, while preserve truth invoked moral duty. It was no longer a tabloid spat. It had become a public crusade. Within 24 hours, the palace's official website quietly updated a page, the section listing royal children's official biographies. Observers noted that the line referring to Archie's birth hospital was missing. It was subtle, almost invisible, but royal enthusiasts noticed immediately. Social media exploded with screenshots comparing the new version to archived copies. "They're scrubbing details," one user tweeted. Others accused the palace of digital manipulation. What may have been a routine site update now looked like evidence tampering. In the public mind, every silence and every edit became confirmation. While the world spiraled in speculation, journalists in London began tracing the timeline of how Lady C could have obtained any records at all. Some pointed to her long-standing connections within the aristocracy, friends who had worked at Windsor, aides who once managed royal paperwork. Others theorized that she had been approached by a disillusioned insider tired of the lies. The most provocative theory suggested that someone within the royal administrative system had leaked information in protest after years of suppressing truth. If that were true, Lady C's revelation wasn't just an exposé. It was a rebellion from within the monarchy itself. The middle portion of the story focuses on the chaos that followed. Tabloids dispatched reporters to Windsor and Frogmore, where Meghan and Harry had once lived. Paparazzi camped near Lady C's residence, hoping for photographs of the supposed documents. Legal experts appeared on nightly panels debating whether adoption records, if true, could legally disqualify Archie from titles. "If the papers exist, the implications are constitutional," one barrister remarked. "You're not just dealing with gossip, you're dealing with succession law." Another commentator added that secrecy of this magnitude could signal a crisis of monarchy credibility unseen since the 1930s. The palace reportedly went into lockdown mode. Staff phones were confiscated for internal audits, while senior communications officers drafted a contingency plan for what to do if the records ever surfaced publicly. Sources later claimed the atmosphere was suffocating. Long silences in hallways, whispers between departments, and an air of dread that no one dared acknowledge. A former courtier described it as the kind of tension that tells you truth is nearby but forbidden. Meanwhile, Meghan's public team remained silent. Her allies posted cryptic motivational quotes on social media about truth being twisted and the need for compassion, but no one directly addressed the claim. This silence was interpreted as either strategic restraint or quiet panic. For those who once defended Meghan as a victim of royal cruelty, Lady C's statements felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. For critics, it was vindication, proof that what they suspected all along was now surfacing. Internationally, the story had legs. American networks picked it up, framing it as a clash between freedom of information and royal secrecy. European outlets compared it to past royal cover-ups, drawing parallels to Princess Diana's concealed struggles and even historical manipulations of birth legitimacy in earlier reigns. Royal historians emerged from retirement to weigh in, some dismissing the claims as impossible under current documentation laws, others admitting that royal exemptions could obscure almost anything. The effect was cumulative. The more people tried to explain the impossibility, the more believable the conspiracy became. As the first week passed, new subplots emerged. Anonymous insiders began feeding small pieces of information to tabloid journalists. That the birth certificate had required 3 revisions. That Meghan's legal representatives requested non-disclosure agreements for hospital staff. That there were alternative guardianship documents created around the time of the birth. None of these details could be verified, but verification no longer mattered. The narrative had achieved self-sustaining momentum. The palace's attempt to contain the storm only convinced the world that there was, indeed, something to hide. In that photo session, Meghan appeared in a pristine white dress, holding Archie as Harry beamed beside her. But the questions only grew louder. The baby's size seemed inconsistent with a newborn of 2 days. The absence of visible post-birth exhaustion, the lack of hospital identification, and the deliberate exclusion of medical staff from the photo session all raised eyebrows. It wasn't just speculation, it was the kind of visual inconsistency that journalists could not ignore. Normally, royal births are documented meticulously, but in this case, the narrative was curated like a film scene. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel real. The official birth certificate, released weeks later, only deepened the mystery. Meghan's name appeared as Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The location of birth was listed as Portland Hospital in London, a private facility often used by high-profile clients. Yet within months, the document was altered. Meghan's name was shortened to simply Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The palace claimed it was an administrative change, but insiders revealed it had been done at the request of Buckingham Palace. That modification, trivial on the surface, triggered a storm. Why alter a royal birth record after the fact? Why erase the mother's personal name from a document meant to confirm authenticity? For those who believed in transparency, this was the point where trust shattered. The official narrative no longer held. Meghan's defenders claimed she was protecting her child from media intrusion. Her critics argued she was hiding something fundamental. The polarization was complete, 2 versions of reality running parallel, never touching. One saw Meghan as a mother defending her privacy. The other saw her as an actress managing a script that had slipped out of control. In the months that followed, Meghan's approach to motherhood became an extension of her public defiance. The christening, traditionally a public celebration, was held in complete secrecy. No cameras were allowed, no media invitations sent. Even the names of Archie's godparents were withheld, a breach of centuries-old custom. The palace issued a short statement emphasizing private family joy, but the public wasn't buying it. Transparency, once the monarchy's shield, had become its greatest vulnerability. Every secret now felt like evidence of deceit. Then came the photographs or the lack thereof. Official portraits were few and heavily edited. Meghan's posture in them was immaculate, her gaze poised, her expression serene. But it was what wasn't visible that drove curiosity. The distance between her and the baby, the composition of the shots, the avoidance of candid moments. These choices fed into a growing online narrative that something was off. Experts in royal protocol noted that every photo released seemed to communicate control rather than intimacy. Meghan wasn't a mother being celebrated. She was a brand being maintained. The middle of this chapter explores how these choices affected her standing within the royal structure. Behind the scenes, reports suggested frustration within the palace. Senior courtiers viewed Meghan's insistence on privacy as incompatible with her role. For the monarchy, every royal birth is a national event, not a personal milestone. But Meghan, an American and a celebrity, saw it differently. She viewed motherhood through the lens of autonomy, not institution. The clash was inevitable. Her decision to avoid the Lindo Wing's public debut moment wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was a declaration of independence from royal tradition. To those within the firm, it was unforgivable. As the months passed, Harry's loyalty deepened, even as his isolation from family grew. He defended Meghan's choices, often at the cost of alienating palace staff. Rumors circulated of heated arguments between the Sussexes and royal advisors over public obligations. Some reports claimed that Harry became increasingly protective, convinced that palace insiders were leaking details to undermine Meghan. The couple's sense of paranoia grew, and with it, their separation from the rest of the royal household. By late 2019, they had moved to Frogmore Cottage, far from the main royal residences, a symbolic exile within their own institution. From there, the distance between image and reality widened. Meghan's interviews during that period painted her as exhausted but fulfilled, emotional but strong. Yet even her words seemed carefully selected. In one televised segment, she famously thanked the interviewer for asking if she was okay. The moment was raw, human, and viral. It earned her empathy from millions. But it also sparked a question that lingers. Was this genuine vulnerability or strategic positioning before an inevitable break from the royal family? Every public moment seemed to carry two interpretations, depending on the lens through which it was viewed. By the time the couple announced their departure from royal duties in January 2020, the narrative of Meghan's motherhood had already been rewritten. The institution saw her as defiant. She saw herself as liberated. To her supporters, she was a modern woman rejecting an archaic system. To her critics, she was rewriting the truth to suit her image. And yet, at the center of all this noise was one small child, Archie Harrison, whose very existence had become the epicenter of royal doubt. In retrospect, Lady C's later claim about adoption didn't emerge from a vacuum. It found fertile ground in the cracks Meghan herself had created. Every decision that once seemed like a quest for privacy now looked like potential concealment. Every deviation from tradition looked like premeditation. The refusal to name doctors, the hidden christening, the birth certificate alteration. All pieces of a puzzle that, when re-examined through the lens of Lady C's leak, formed a picture few could ignore. The chapter closes with a tone of quiet inevitability. The mystery of Meghan's motherhood wasn't born from gossip. It was constructed from her own choices. Whether those choices were made out of fear, control, or necessity remains the unanswered question. But one thing is clear: by trying to redefine royal motherhood on her own terms, Meghan inadvertently created the perfect stage for suspicion. The world once celebrated her as the woman who brought modern compassion to the monarchy. Now, years later, she finds herself haunted by the same narrative she tried to control. For a family built on image, her story became both prophecy and warning. When the truth is obscured, even love becomes suspect. And as the next chapter of this unfolding saga begins, the question deepens. Not just who Meghan Markle is as a mother, but whether the story of Archie Harrison was ever truly hers to tell. The moment Lady Colin Campbell uttered the phrase, "adoption records," the air around Buckingham Palace changed. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was an accusation wrapped in legal implication, moral outrage, and constitutional uncertainty. Royal scandals had come and gone before, but this one touched the monarchy's most sensitive nerve. Lineage. Questioned not merely behavior, but blood. And in a world where every crown, title, and inheritance rests on ancestral legitimacy, Lady C's words were equivalent to dropping dynamite in the royal archives. To the public, the phrase "adoption papers" conjured images of dusty files locked deep within the palace's private registry, guarded by tradition and silence. But what Lady C implied was far more specific, and infinitely more dangerous. She claimed to have seen or been made aware of official legal documentation confirming that Archie Harrison was not born to Meghan Markle, but legally adopted under conditions that were shielded by royal privilege. That one sentence, if true, meant that the entire narrative presented to the world, the home birth, The glowing post-birth photos, the royal baby celebrations, was a performance built on deception. The first wave of shock came from the suggestion of a sealed adoption order. In the United Kingdom, adoption records are generally confidential, but they are not beyond reach. Yet when those records involve the royal family, they fall under a different level of classification, protected by the Official Secrets Act, meaning disclosure could be considered a matter of state sensitivity. Lady C's claim implied that the palace had used those same legal instruments, not to protect a child's privacy, but to construct a narrative that fit its public image. Investigative journalists immediately began scouring court databases and registry indexes, but predictably found nothing. Royal files are not kept in the same systems as ordinary citizens. However, whispers emerged of irregular documentation trails. An insider, speaking anonymously, told one outlet that certain entries related to Archie's registration were delayed and filed under coded references. Another alleged that there had been correspondence between the palace legal team and a private family court judge in the weeks preceding Archie's public presentation. No proof was released, but the detail was precise enough to make headlines. The implications were catastrophic. If an adoption had been formalized under secrecy, it raised two monumental questions. First, why hide it? And second, how far would the institution go to maintain the illusion? For centuries, royal lineage had been sacrosanct. Every heir's legitimacy was meticulously documented. From Henry VIII's annulments to the DNA testing of ancient remains, bloodline authenticity defined royal continuity. But Lady C's allegations suggested something else, a conscious decision to replace transparency with narrative control. The story gained further traction when a group of legal analysts published a speculative paper online, exploring the constitutional consequences of such a revelation. They argued that if Archie were adopted and not biologically connected to Prince Harry, he would not qualify for royal titles or inheritance under existing royal patent law. The act of concealment, they wrote, could therefore constitute a deception against the crown and the public. It wasn't an accusation. It was a legal interpretation waiting to be proven true. Behind closed doors, the palace's response machinery went into overdrive. Staff were instructed to stay off personal devices. Access to archival databases was restricted. Media requests for comment were declined uniformly. But every denial sounded evasive, and every silence became evidence of guilt in the public's eyes. Even royal watchers who once defended Meghan began asking hard questions. How could a child's birth, announced with such fanfare, now be so riddled with inconsistencies? The middle portion of this chapter delves deeper into the mechanics of the alleged papers. Lady C's description, though intentionally vague, was chilling in its specificity. She spoke of official forms signed by representatives acting on behalf of the Duchess, and of a private clause invoking protection of identity. She never named the child directly but left no ambiguity about who she was referring to. The adoption, she implied, was processed through private legal channels shortly before the family's relocation to Windsor. Some speculated the biological mother was someone connected to Meghan's wider circle. Others whispered of surrogacy arrangements disguised as adoption. The narrative fragmented into multiple theories, each more sensational than the last. Some believed that medical complications had prevented Meghan from carrying a child to term, and that the adoption had been orchestrated to preserve the image of a natural royal birth. Others insisted that Harry and Meghan had chosen adoption out of compassion, intending to protect the child's privacy until he was old enough to understand. But what united every version was one theme: the palace knew and chose to keep the truth hidden. Journalists started revisiting past footage. Meghan's carefully worded statement about giving birth in the comfort of our home was re-examined, parsed word by word. If the child was adopted, then in our home could have been literal but not in the way anyone assumed. Linguistic analysts even weighed in, dissecting her phrasing in interviews to highlight what she didn't say rather than what she did. The absence of medical names, the lack of any hospital confirmation, and the omission of the word delivered suddenly seemed glaring. Meanwhile, legal experts were divided over the practicality of hiding such a process. Some argued it was impossible, too many signatures, too many witnesses. Others countered that royal privilege changes the equation. When the monarchy invokes privacy under the guise of security, the system bends. Records can be sealed indefinitely, registrars can be instructed to use pseudonyms, and documentation can be archived in inaccessible collections. A single phone call from a royal official can close an entire file. The more analysts explained how this could happen, the more believable Lady C's claim became. The public reaction grew darker. Online forums turned into investigative collectives, comparing Meghan's pregnancy photos to known gestational timelines. Amateur sleuths charted the dates of her public appearances, noting inconsistencies in her physical presentation. While much of it was speculation, the collective energy was undeniable. What had begun as curiosity transformed into obsession. People wanted truth, and the monarchy's silence left them with no choice but to construct it themselves. Then, another development sent shockwaves through the discussion. A whistleblower claiming to be a former administrative liaison came forward, alleging that a birth file was duplicated in 2019 under special security clearance. The statement couldn't be verified, but its language was sophisticated enough to sound credible. The whistleblower's claim suggested the creation of two records, one for public release, another for classified retention. If true, it would explain the conflicting data points surrounding Archie's registration. The palace refused to respond, but once again, silence was louder than denial. The chapter reaches its emotional peak with the realization of what these papers represented beyond gossip. If adoption had occurred, it wasn't just a private matter, it was a constitutional bomb. Because monarchy, unlike celebrity, is built on blood legitimacy. Every descendant's status flows from the authenticity of lineage. A secret adoption, therefore, wouldn't just threaten image. It could invalidate hierarchy. Archie's place in succession could be rendered null, Harry's credibility compromised, and the entire institution thrust into legal uncertainty. Even those who dismissed Lady C as sensationalistic couldn't ignore that she had been right before. Years earlier, she had predicted tensions within the royal family long before they surfaced publicly. Her accuracy on minor palace details gave weight to her major claims. To her supporters, she wasn't gossiping. She was documenting. As days passed, the alleged adoption papers became a ghostly presence in the media cycle, always referenced, never revealed. Some commentators argued that Lady C might have partial information, perhaps correspondence related to guardianship rather than formal adoption. Others speculated that she was using coded language to avoid direct legal reprisal. Regardless, the phrase adoption papers had achieved what no scandal had in years. It forced the monarchy into a reactive posture. By the third week of coverage, Buckingham Palace convened private legal consultations. Lawyers debated whether to issue a categorical denial, but advisors warned against it. If any element of the claim was true, even procedural, a denial could later be weaponized. The institution chose its oldest defense: inaction. The cost of silence was public suspicion. The cost of transparency could be constitutional collapse. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's supporters accused Lady C of cruelty, of exploiting a child for attention. Yet even among Meghan's most ardent fans, doubts lingered. Why hadn't she or Harry simply issued a clear statement affirming the circumstances of Archie's birth? Why had they sued over trivial tabloid stories, yet remained silent about an allegation this severe? In the realm of perception, silence was confession. The chapter's final moments draw the reader toward quiet reflection rather than conclusion. Lady C's claim had accomplished what few scandals could. It forced the world to confront the fragility of royal truth. The monarchy's power has always rested on belief. Belief that its members are who they claim to be. Belief that its rituals have meaning. But belief is brittle. Once cracked, it cannot be restored with silence or ceremony. If adoption papers truly exist, they may never be seen. They may remain sealed within archives guarded by generations of gatekeepers. Yet their shadow already lingers across history, shaping perception and trust. The royal family can withstand gossip, betrayal, even abdication. But can it survive doubt about its own bloodline? That is the question now haunting the House of Windsor. And as the story moves forward, the mystery only deepens. Because according to Lady C, those papers weren't the only secret. Alongside them, she hinted, existed another set of records, medical documents, immunization refusals, and health exemptions, showing that Meghan's rebellion extended beyond the law and into the very health of the child she claimed as her own. When the first whispers surfaced about Meghan Markle's alleged refusal to immunize Archie, it didn't seem like much more than another layer of gossip piled onto an already convoluted story. Yet within the framework of the royal family, where every medical protocol is steeped in centuries of tradition, the claim carried weight far beyond the tabloids. It wasn't simply about vaccines. It was about control, defiance, and the symbolic rejection of royal authority over her own child. To question the monarchy's medical customs was to challenge one of the few aspects of royal life that had remained untouched by modern rebellion: health protocol governed by lineage, heritage, and institutional trust. The claim originated from Lady Colin Campbell's elaboration during a second interview following her adoption revelation. While her earlier statements focused on the legality and secrecy of Archie's birth, this time she took aim at the moral heart of royal duty, the well-being of a royal child. There were decisions made, she said, that directly contravened the royal medical code, decisions the palace could not condone and could not stop. Her tone was deliberate, restrained, but every word dripped with insinuation. According to her, Meghan had not only rejected royal doctors during pregnancy, but had also refused the postnatal immunization program required for all royal infants under the supervision of the royal household medical team. At first, the story sounded implausible. Royal children are usually immunized under a structured medical timeline overseen by the Queen's physicians. Records dating back to Queen Victoria show consistent adherence to medical standards, with every royal baby's health supervised by the monarch's medical staff. These immunizations aren't merely medical, they're symbolic of compliance, continuity, and respect for institutional stability. Meghan's alleged refusal, therefore, was not a private medical choice. It was an act of defiance against royal structure. When Lady C made her statement, public reaction split instantly. Supporters of Meghan argued that every mother has the right to make her own healthcare decisions, while critics saw it as confirmation that she viewed herself as above royal norms. Public opinion hardened. The more Meghan remained silent, the more people assumed the worst. Online forums debated the ethics of withholding vaccines, blending genuine medical concern with royal drama. If the future king's nephew isn't vaccinated, what message does that send? One commentator wrote. Others defended her right to privacy, arguing that motherhood shouldn't be a matter of national inspection. The polarization was total. Around this time, a journalist from a major British newspaper published a feature citing an unnamed royal doctor who had expressed concern over Meghan's non-compliance with recommended immunization schedules. Though the palace refused to confirm or deny the report, the article went viral. It suggested that Meghan's choices had caused internal alarm long before Lady C made them public. The royal doctor, described only as long-serving, allegedly warned that a pattern of medical secrecy had emerged. Once again, the details were unverifiable, but the language was damning. By now, the story was not just a media circus but a diplomatic problem. Royal health practices are part of Britain's soft power, symbols of order and trust. The mere suggestion that a royal child was unvaccinated carried international consequences. News outlets in the United States, Canada, and Australia began running their own coverage, often portraying Meghan as a rebellious figure challenging outdated systems. The British press, however, remained far less forgiving. A mother's right or royal irresponsibility? One headline asked. As the weeks dragged on, Harry's demeanor during public appearances drew scrutiny. Observers described him as tense, distant, occasionally defensive. He seemed to be carrying the burden of an invisible argument. Some speculated that he disagreed with Meghan's alleged choices but chose loyalty over confrontation. Others believed he fully supported her decisions. Either way, the couple's unity became part of the spectacle. What had once been their strength, standing together against the institution, was now perceived as complicity. Toward the end of the chapter, the controversy reaches a point of moral complexity. On one hand, every parent should have the right to make choices about their child's health. On the other, the monarchy's relationship with the public is built on representation. When a royal defies medical standards, it sends a signal far beyond personal boundaries. It disrupts the social contract between ruler and subject. Lady C's narrative exploited that tension masterfully. Whether or not she possessed proof, she understood the symbolic power of implication. In her final televised comment on the matter, she summarized it with cold precision. It's not about a vaccine, it's about allegiance. Every royal mother before her understood that their children didn't just belong to them, they belonged to history. The line echoed across social media, quoted, debated, attacked, and applauded. It framed Meghan's alleged choice as more than a personal rebellion. It was cast as a break in the royal chain itself. The chapter ends on an image of uneasy quiet. The palace remains silent. Meghan's team issues no denial. The public grows weary but watchful. The damage, however, is already done. The royal family's image as guardians of health and duty has been bruised. And in that silence, the same question that haunted the adoption story now lingers over the immunization debate. If there was nothing to hide, why hide anything at all? As the narrative moves into the next phase, the focus shifts from the accusation itself to the aftermath. The palace's controlled chaos, the aides scrambling to contain fallout, and the desperate attempts to reassert order in an institution suddenly aware that its greatest threat wasn't outside, but within. The palace had weathered storms before, but none like this. By the time Countess Cordelia's revelations about the adoption files and the health dispute reached every major network, the House of Arclane's communications offices resembled a command center under siege. Phones rang without pause. Aides moved in silence, clutching folders as if they were shields. Outside the iron gates of Eastmere Hall, reporters shouted questions into the rain, flashes strobing like distant lightning. For generations, scandal had been managed through the same formula. Deny, delay, distract. It had worked during the wars through divorces and affairs. But now, in a world of live feeds and encrypted leaks, even the oldest formula felt obsolete. Silence, once a royal weapon, had become a liability. The morning after Cordelia's interview, the palace issued its first and only statement. The House of Arclane does not respond to unfounded speculation regarding the private affairs of its members. The line was crafted to end discussion. Instead, it poured oil on the fire. Across the country, newspapers printed the sentence under headlines that screamed hypocrisy. Online, commentators mocked its coldness. Unfounded speculation? One wrote. Then why does it sound like a confession written in marble? Within hours, public opinion polls showed a sharp drop in trust toward the royal household. For the first time in living memory, citizens questioned not the monarchy's cost, but its honesty. Inside the press wing, a junior aide named Jonathan Vance muttered that they should have gone with the softer draft, something empathetic, something human. But senior officials refused. Empathy was dangerous, they said. It invited further inquiry. What they failed to understand was that distance no longer conveyed dignity. It signaled fear. Meanwhile, Lady Miriam and Prince Hadrian retreated to Wrenbridge Manor, a secluded estate north of the capital. Their absence only fed speculation. Helicopters hovered over the tree line, capturing glimpses of shuttered windows and drawn curtains. When the couple finally appeared, stepping from a black car onto the tarmac en route to a charity event, the cameras zoomed in on their faces. Miriam's expression was composed but hollow. Hadrian's jaw was set in exhaustion. The footage looped for days. Every blink became a headline. Behind closed doors, the crisis meetings grew harsher. The Lord Chamberlain demanded an internal inquiry into the leak's origin. Advisors traced communication logs, suspecting that someone from the household archives had spoken to Cordelia. Files were audited, permissions revoked, digital access frozen. In one tense session, the Queen Dowager herself allegedly slammed her cane against the floor and declared, "We no longer control our own story." That sentence defined the mood inside Eastmere Hall. The monarchy's greatest fear was not exposure, it was irrelevance. To lose narrative control was to lose authority. Countess Cordelia had seized that control effortlessly, armed with insinuation and a velvet voice. By the third day, the palace engaged a private crisis management firm, experts in corporate disasters, not royal ones. Their strategy was radical by Arch standards. Transparency. Release selective truths to regain credibility. Leak internal documents that showed Miriam as compliant, compassionate, maternal. The suggestion horrified the senior courtiers. Truth, one official whispered, is not the monarchy's language. The plan was buried. Instead, they fell back on choreography. Appearances were scheduled, visits to hospitals, children's charities, veteran centers. The intent was simple: drown accusation in activity. Show the Duchess at work, smiling, graceful, unbothered. Cameras captured every handshake. But something in her eyes betrayed fatigue. Each outing felt like theater staged against a burning backdrop. The press refused to move on. Every gesture was dissected. When Miriam lifted a child at a hospital visit, tabloids asked if it was symbolism. When she glanced at her husband instead of the photographers, they called it guilt. The monarchy had entered a new age where sincerity and performance were indistinguishable. In the communications wing, desperation bred invention. A senior advisor proposed a televised address, a direct appeal from Prince Hadrian to the nation. The Queen Dowager vetoed it immediately. Every word he utters becomes evidence, she warned. The family's silence persisted, heavy as a locked vault. As the days passed, another crisis unfolded quietly beneath the surface. The staff themselves were divided. Younger aides, raised in the digital era, argued that authenticity was the only path forward. People forgive mistakes, one said, but they don't forgive silence. The older courtiers, veterans of past scandals, clung to tradition. We survive by endurance, not confession, they insisted. The debate became a generational civil war fought in whispers and memos. Outside those walls, Countess Cordelia watched with the serenity of someone who knew time was on her side. In a follow-up interview, she noted the palace's refusal to answer specifics. I expected as much, she said calmly. Truth makes them nervous. It should. Her composure unnerved even her critics. When asked whether she feared retaliation, she smiled. One cannot threaten someone who has already told the truth. Every broadcast of her face was a reminder of the monarchy's vulnerability. For the first time, an outsider dictated the rhythm of their story. She hinted that there were letters, perhaps even recordings, but refused to elaborate. The ambiguity was lethal. The less she revealed, the more believable she became. Midway through the week, an emergency session of the Privy Council was convened. Advisors from legal, security, and public relations sectors gathered in a room lined with portraits of kings who had survived revolutions. The agenda was bleak: evaluate the risk of disclosure. One lawyer warned that if genuine adoption papers existed, even incomplete drafts, the legal ramifications could extend to succession rights. Another argued that the allegations, true or false, were already eroding public confidence beyond repair. We're not defending a fact, he said. We're defending a feeling, and we're losing it. That night, the palace released a second statement, slightly warmer, still sterile. Their Highnesses wish to express gratitude for the concern shown by the public and reaffirm their unwavering commitment to their family and to public service. It was meant to sound reassuring. Instead, it read like surrender. Public reaction was swift and merciless. Social media mocked the phrase unwavering commitment, turning it into a meme. Late-night hosts imitated the royal accent, repeating the line with theatrical sorrow. Within hours, the palace statement had become a joke, the kind that leaves permanent scars. For Lady Miriam, the ordeal became personal torment. Friends later described her pacing through the halls of Wrenbridge Manor at night, reading comment sections on her phone until dawn. Every insult cut deeper than she expected. They think I'm a monster, she reportedly told a confidant, and I can't say anything to prove otherwise. Prince Hadrian, meanwhile, retreated into silence, channeling his anger into work. The marriage, once a symbol of unity, began to fracture under the weight of mutual exhaustion. Then came the internal betrayal. A leaked email from an aide suggested that discussions had indeed occurred months earlier about alternative medical arrangements for the child. The message was old, vague, and devoid of confirmation, but once it hit the tabloids, context no longer mattered. The implication was clear. The palace had lied. The monarchy's response machine-spun furiously. Lawyers sent cease and desist letters. Media outlets published them as proof of intimidation. The more the palace fought, the deeper it sank. By now, the Queen Dowager's once unquestioned authority was crumbling. Younger royals whispered that she was out of touch. Older officials accused her of indecision. In one late-night exchange recorded in a leaked memo, a senior strategist wrote, "If we don't reveal something, anything, soon, we will be ruled by silence." And yet, the institution could not change its nature. Secrecy was in its bones. Even as advisors urged transparency, courtiers tightened control, deleting digital archives, locking physical files. "We'll outlast the noise," they told each other. But the noise had become permanent. By the end of the month, the House of Arclane's approval ratings had fallen to their lowest level in a century. Parliament began murmuring about accountability committees, an unthinkable notion only weeks earlier. Cordelia, the countess who had set the fire, published a cryptic message on her social feed. "When truth meets silence, silence always loses." Within Eastmere Hall, no one dared quote it aloud, but everyone had read it. The chapter closes with a night scene. Rain lashes the palace windows. Lights burn in the communications office long after midnight. The Lord Chamberlain stands by the window, watching the press tents glowing in the darkness. "They're not going away," he says quietly. Another aide replies, "Neither are we," but even he doesn't sound convinced. Somewhere beyond those walls, Countess Cordelia sits in her study, a single lamp illuminating a folder on her desk. She doesn't open it. She doesn't need to. The power is no longer in the papers. It's in the silence of the people who fear them. The monarchy has survived yet another week, but survival feels smaller now, more temporary. The question no one dares ask still hangs in the air. If the truth ever breaks completely free, will there be anything left of the crown to protect?